Oh boy, she really wants you to know. Okay, so we are now recording. So don't say anything that you don't want recorded for posterity for all time. Okay, so I'm going to talk about tactical call signs. This is pretty short. So, if we finish early, no big deal. But I was just thinking about different topics that we could use for a class. And I had a bunch of different topics that came up in my mind, one of which was, I don't know if you guys remember or have ever read about the experiments that Gordon and Clint, I think, were doing with communicating using visible light. They did like 180 some odd mile shot with visible light from mountain to mountain and actually managed to modulate voice over that circuit. And it was a pretty cool project. It happened about, I want to say 2007 is when they were doing it. But so that was one that I thought about, but then I thought, no, it'd be better if we could get one of them to come and present on that. That would be cool to have one of them talk about what they actually did. Maybe they could bring the hardware in if they still have it. So I tabled that one. And then I thought, well, what about something with WinLink? We want to use WinLink more. We could do something about WinLink. But then I remembered that neither Chris nor I have been able to get WinLink to work with his machine at home. So I thought, well, maybe we should figure that out first, and then we could do a presentation on what we had to do there. So,
I've been working on it.
So then I thought, well, how about one of the things that we are probably, as we're getting more into the SAG season here, we're more likely to be using tactical call signs in our volunteer work. And I thought, I know we've used tactical call signs before, but maybe people would like a refresher on how tactical call signs work and what they're for and all of that. So I thought, okay, well, that sounds like a decent topic. And I assumed that I could find sufficient information to fill at least 20 minutes. So this is what I came up with. Now, the first thing that I want to do is click on the right window so that it advances correctly. Come on now. How about that? Okay, so let's talk about call signs first. So your call signs can, okay, I'll warn you up front, there's going to be some walls of text on this presentation. Yeah, Dan's already got his binoculars out. So if you have trouble reading it, don't worry, I'm probably going to read it to you. But the text is here for posterity, so when we publish this presentation, people can see it. And it's really, it's more geared towards watching it on the computer than trying to watch it on the screen from, especially you cool kids in the back row back there, you might have a little trouble. But yeah, so call signs are assigned by the FCC or your country's authority that's responsible for licensing. Different countries have different organizations, obviously. Here in the US, it's the FCC. The format is typically a prefix, a separator, and a suffix. The prefix is assigned by the country. Some countries have multiple prefixes, and those prefixes are assigned by the ITUs. Anybody remember what ITU stands for?
International Telecommunications Union.
I thought it's universal or something like that. It's French. So those crazy French guys, yeah, those crazy French guys, they kind of change the order of words and things like that. But anyway, so the ITU is an international organization that's responsible for communications around the world. In the call sign, the separator is typically a numeral, like 0 through 9. In the US, our call signs start with K, A, W, or N. Now, we have all of the Ks, we have all of the Ws, and we have all of the Ns, but we don't have all of the As. So if your call sign starts with A, it's going to start with A something that is less than, I think it's N. So we have like A through AM or something like that. I'd have to go look it up again to know for sure. But yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. When you hear a call sign that starts with K, A, W, or N, it's probably a US call sign. What are some other call signs that we have heard on the radio that are not US call signs? Anybody have any ideas, Chris?
V, which is Canada, VK, which is Australia, G is UK,
D is Germany,
JA
JA is Japan,
X is Mexico.
So there's lots of different initial letters, and those will indicate what country has assigned that call sign. So most of the call signs take the form of N by N, what they call N by N. So you have a 2x3 call sign. It's going to have the prefix is going to be 2 characters. Then the separator is a digit. That's the X. And then the suffix is 3 characters in a 2x3. So like my call sign is a 2x3. Dan's is a 1x3. Paul's is a 2x2, AE4KR, right? Gordon is a 1x3, K7HFV. Friend of mine, Jeff McGrath, he's got a 1x2, N1SC.
There's a 2x1.
There is also a 2x1. The digit in the middle refers to the region in the US. So this is the region you were in when you got your call sign. Now, years ago, if you moved, so say you lived in Massachusetts and you got a call sign with a 1 in it, and then you packed up and moved to Utah, you would abandon your 1 call sign and get a 7 call sign. They don't do that anymore. Now you can have people with all kinds of numbers, no matter where you're at, it doesn't really matter. They still assign them if you do, when you get your new call sign, if you do a, what they call it, a systematic call sign issue, where you're just getting the next available call sign, it'll still have the digit based on the region that you're in when you get your call sign, but you don't have to change it when you move. So you'll find people on the radio here on local repeaters with 4 or 6 from California. They'll be here now and using that. So also the Alaska used to always start with KL, KL7, and Hawaii used to always start with KH6. And I don't think that's the case anymore either. I think they've abandoned that.
No, they usually have an HN in Hawaii. I heard an NH6. That's great. I think there's some variety in Alaska, but the demand for call signs in Alaska is pretty minimal. So.
Well, yeah, there's not too many people in Alaska, so. But you'll notice Region 7, where we live, covers quite a few states. So I thought that was kind of interesting. 0 covers quite a few in the Midwest there. I don't know why they call that region the Midwest, since it's not the West. It's not. It's more. It's the mid.
It's the mid-north.
It's the mid-dole, but I don't know how it got the name Midwest, but that's what they call it. I don't know why. And then we out here in the, I guess, Rocky Mountain region, West.
That's exactly what we are.
Rocky Mountain region, right? But why would Washington and Oregon be lumped in with the Rocky Mountain? I don't know. Why didn't they put them with California? Probably because there's a lot of people in California.
Yeah.
That could be the case. Okay, so anyway, this is where the number comes from, right? So there are also 1x1 call signs. These are special event call signs, and we're going to talk about those in a bit. I'm not going to talk about them right now, but just be aware that those exist, and we'll get to them in a minute. Okay, so how do we use our call sign, or why do we have call signs? So on CB radio, I don't know if any of you guys have ever used CB radio. They don't have call signs, right? They had handle. They used to have call signs. Back in the 70s and 80s, they had call signs that were actually issued by the FCC. Do you still remember your call sign, Dan?
KBEX 3683.
Very good.
That's a late issue that had 4 letters and 4 numbers.
Yeah, you're cooking there. They abandoned the call signs for CB radio a while ago because CB radio, it's kind of like the Wild West, right? It's self-mismanaged, and you know, people would get on there without getting a call sign anyway. So the FCC decided, you know what, it's not worth our time to police this unless people are egregiously violating the rules, like firing out 1,500 watts on their CB radio. We're probably not going to care. But yeah, so used to have call signs, but they don't anymore. And so now you'll hear people, they'll use what they called their handle. And that was what most people used on the CB, was your handle, which was your nickname, right? What was your handle, Dan?
Laser.
Laser? Oh, that's awesome. I like that. Okay. Yeah, so my wife has been watching this TV show called Longmire. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it, but it's supposedly based in Wyoming, and it was really filmed in like New Mexico or somewhere, but in the show, there was an episode that she had on the other night, and they were at this place and some guy had ham radio equipment, but it was really CB equipment, and they used it as if it were CB equipment with the CB handles and everything. But they pretended it was ham radio equipment, and I just had to basically put my headphones on and ignore it entirely and listen to something else, because if I didn't, I would have interrupted her and made her angry with me, as I usually do when anything aviation related or radio related is on TV. So, but yeah, so CB radio. FRS does not use call signs. GMRS does, but FRS does not. No license is required for that. Amateur radio requires them. GMRS, you're supposed to have one. I know a lot of people don't, but you're supposed to have one. And commercial and broadcast radio and TV, they depend on them, right? They have to do their station ID at the top of every hour, and they make sure to give their call sign, and quite often their operating frequency as well, or channel in the case of television. But yeah, so those identifying signals, those call signs, are super important to the FCC. They are used to legally identify the station or whoever is transmitting, right? And it's a worldwide unique identifier. So no, the FCC will not issue the same call sign to two different people unless one of them has died and you request specifically to reuse that call sign, or it's expired for more than 2 years. And then they could reissue it at that point. But in general, they try to avoid that, right? So, all right. So call sign usage. So what are our ID requirements? We've gone over this a number of times. What are the ID requirements? Sherwood?
Every 10 minutes, you have to give call sign.
Every
10 minutes.
Nope. Not when you start.
Every 10 minutes and when we finish.
And when you finish, right? So you have to do
I
it.
always hear everybody giving their call sign when they start.
It's not a bad idea to do it when you start. Because then people know who you are, and if they don't recognize your voice, they'll at least hear your call sign, right? But the requirement is that you have to ID at least every 10 minutes and at the end of your communication, right? Or as I put on the slide, conversation. Where is this defined? It is defined in regulation part 97. Part 97 is the ham radio regulations, right? Section 119, station identification. And it says each amateur station, except a space station or telecommand station, must transmit its assigned call sign on its transmitting channel at the end of each communication and at least every 10 minutes during the communication for the purpose of clearly making the source of the transmissions from the station known to those receiving the transmission. Boy, this is so legalese, it's making you sick. And no station may transmit unidentified communications or signals or transmit as the station call sign any call sign not authorized to the station. All right, so how many people have kerchunked the repeater to see if you're getting there? Never would we do a thing like that, right? Is that a legal thing to do? If you ID. Yeah, if you kerchunk it and you hear the chunk and then you say, Katie said to do, that's fine, right? Because you identified at the end of your conversation. Although who were you talking to? You weren't really talking to anybody, right? Yeah, you're talking to the repeater. Yeah, I'm talking to the repeater. Yeah, that's what matters, right? Sure. Yeah.
Interesting side note, the FCC has enforcement personnel that will find you. Now, back in the CB.
Do you speak from experience, Steve?
Back in the day, I was riding here Logan with the CB and talked all the time. I got thinking about that, so I called the FCC, and I think our closest thing was Denver. Call them, talk to them on the phone, the real FCC guys. And I questioned them and said, what kind of enforcement do you have for people who break the rules? And he said, if you break the rules, we will catch you and take your radio away. And I said, well, okay, I'm in Salt Lake. How many people do you have that are doing this? And he said, we've got an enforcement officer that covers Denver to California. And we'll catch it.
Eventually.
I said, how many? One. We got one guy that covers Denver to California, and if you screw up, we're gonna catch you. CB.
So while that may be true, there are volunteers who will find out if you're transmitting improperly and could report you. Dan, you had a comment.
In the ham radio world, that is called an OO. And the ARRL has relinquished that. So there are no longer OOs.
Official observers.
Official. That's not to say that you do not have people that are listening in, because I know for a fact that there are.
There are people who put these special DF rigs on their cars to help them track down people that are doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing.
Well,
So
it's not called official observer anymore, and it's not administered through the ARRL, but the FCC does have volunteers who are encouraged to correct things being done wrong, but also with an emphasis on sending a card to someone who's doing something especially right. When you talk about the direction finding equipment, there's also some fixed infrastructure in the Salt Lake area. On a couple of different buildings, they've got a Doppler system which can get a bearing from one and a bearing from the other and triangulate it down to like a city block. And if you've ever noticed, for a while there was somebody QRMing the UARC net on Sunday night, and all of a sudden they disappeared. And I talked to somebody involved in that, and they said, we haven't had to report anybody to the FCC yet. Usually a knock on the door does the job.
and Steve, to complete the point on your comment, yeah, they can confiscate your radio, and in fact, all of your radios, and they can fine you up to $10,000. So
But it was enough to scare me, I'll tell you.
that's, I don't know about you, but I don't want them taking all my radios away for starters. And I certainly don't want to give them $10,000 for just for me being dumb, right? So I want to make sure that I'm trying to follow the rules as best as I can.
One other point, Jan.
Yeah,
The NSA has listening stations around the country.
I'm sure they do.
And I don't know if anybody's played with a software-defined radio and the software that goes with it, but one of the options is if you have enough hard disk space, you can actually record the entire band. So in other words, you can record the 2-meter band for 12 hours and put it in a file. And if you found out something happened, you can go back, play back the entire band and go to that frequency and hear what went on. And the NSA, that's one of those things they're doing with those gigantic servers they have.
Yeah, the huge data center they have down in Lehigh. So the other thing that they do is they actually record all phone conversations that are happening. But it's all encrypted because they're not allowed to actually listen to it unless they have a warrant. Right. So, yeah, anyway, let's go on. Let's move on. So that's A is about when you identify. It also has section B here. The call sign must be transmitted with an emission authorized for the transmitting channel. And what does that mean? An emission authorized for the transmitting channel. That means that if you're on a part of the band that does not allow FM, but only like USB at the low end of the 2-meter band, for example, you better not be IDing with FM. You better stick with the authorized emission for that part of the band. There are other bands that only allow digital communications. Parts of the band that only allow digital, you need to make sure you're IDing in a digital format. So an emission authorized for the transmitting channel in one of the following ways: by a CW emission, when keyed by an automatic device used only for identification, the speed must not exceed 20 words per minute. Whenever you hear the repeater's ID, I know the Farnsworth, the 6.2 on Farnsworth ID is pretty fast, but it better be under 20 words per minute or it's not satisfying this requirement, right?
There's a loophole there. It says if the only thing it does is ID, if it makes a courtesy beep or it generates any other sounds, is exempt from that.
Well, I don't know. That's the specific automatic device, I guess, right? I don't know, that there would be some gray area there, I think. Another option would be a phone emission in the English language, use of a phonetic alphabet as an aid for correct station identification is encouraged. So when we ID on our Sunday net, we usually do it phonetically. And that's a good thing to do because that helps make sure that they're actually hearing the right station ID, right? By an RTTY emission using a specified digital code when all or part of the communications are transmitted by a RTTY or data emission. Who in here has ever used RTTY? How old are you guys? No, I'm sorry. Nobody does RTTY anymore, right? I mean, there are other, I guess some people probably still do just because they can. RTTY is radio teletype, and it uses like a 5-bit code. It's not ASCII. It's, I can't remember the name of it. It's like Bado or something like that. Is that right? Paul's nodding his head. But yeah, so that's a data communications protocol that can be used. And if you're using that, then you can ID via RTTY.
That's used in contests primarily anymore.
And the last one says, by an image emission conforming to the applicable transmission standards, either color or monochrome of section 73.682A of the FCC rules, when all or part of the communications are transmitted in the same image emission. What they're talking about there is slow scan TV images or amateur television, which is high speed, high scan, whatever you call it, fast scan television. I know we have an amateur TV repeater here in Salt Lake. I don't think it's been used since they stopped flying the space shuttle. They used to simulcast the space shuttle video on that, but I don't think that's been happening since we stopped flying the space shuttle. I don't know if anybody's actually using it. That was another thing that I thought we could do a class on is the fast, what did I say it was? Fast scan? That doesn't sound right.
Now they just go animal.
Regular television, let's put it that way, amateur television.
So I'm gonna go with number 2. Use the international phonetics. There's some people who think they're cute or obnoxious, not realizing that's, it's, I'll use that because they're the habits.
Yeah.
Everybody else will use international phonetics, you can understand that.
Yeah, and the problem with, so I've heard people on the radio do that, like kilowatt 7, blah, 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 and they think they're really cool because they're using some word or kilowatt.
Germany, America, Japan.
Yeah, I've heard that too, right? Yeah, and it's like, dude, I can understand that because I speak English natively. And even I'm probably having a tougher time understanding it than I should be. But some poor sap who doesn't speak English natively, trying to hear what you're saying and understand what your call sign is from that, they're gonna have a hard time with it,
I
right?
bet you 30% of field day goers, you do that. Just,
You hear it.
you have to do it.
You hear it a lot, right? I mean, you hear it all the time. And that's not something that it should do. And it does not say in the rules, the International Phonetic Alphabet. So legally, that's okay. It's still a phonetic alphabet. But ask me sometime to share with you the phonetic alphabet, and I will share that with you.
You know what, you're still legal anyway if you ID with just 8 and 4 KR.
Yes, that is correct.
If I also say always cite it for kilowatt units. I'm still legal.
You're still legal. Okay. So section C says one or more indicators that may be included with the call sign. Each indicator must be separated from the call sign by the slant mark, slash, stroke, whatever you want to call it, or by any suitable word that denotes the slant mark. If an indicator is self-assigned, it must be included before, after, or both before and after the call sign. No self-assigned indicator may conflict with any other indicator specified by the FCC rules or with any prefix assigned to another country. We'll talk more about that in a sec. D, when transmitting in conjunction with an event of special significance, a station may substitute for its assigned call sign a special event call sign as shown for that station for that period of time on the common database coordinated, maintained, and disseminated by the special event call sign database coordinators. There's a mouthful. Additionally, the station must transmit its assigned call sign at least once per hour during such transmission. So this is the one-by-one special event call signs, right? So section 97.3A 11.3 says, special event call sign system. This call sign is selected by the station licensee from a list of call signs shown on a common database, coordinated, maintained, and disseminated by the amateur station special event call sign database coordinators. Call sign must have the single letter prefix K, N, or W. Why can't we use A? Because we don't own all the A's. We only own A through whatever it is, A-N or what, A-M. So you'll never hear a one-by-one start with A. So K, N, or W followed by a single numeral 0 through 9, followed by a single letter A through W, or Y, or Z. Why not X? I don't know. I don't know why we don't allow X. For example, K1A, the special call sign is substituted for the call sign shown on the station license grant, that's your license, while the station is transmitting. The FCC will issue public announcements detailing the procedures of the special event call sign system. So who do you suppose is this special event call sign database coordinators? Yeah, good question, right?
They might be based in Untitled.
I don't know. I'm not sure how that gets assigned. Dave, do you know?
I don't know, I know there's the W5Y, we know how to contact. But with the X, the WX call signs are dealing with.
But what about like if it was W1X? You can't have W1X.
I think Dave's right. I think all the call signs ending in X.
All the ending in X are weather related.
The WX, one's beginning with WX.
I like that. That's probably it. We should probably look that up and figure that out.
Actually, more to that, I saw a YouTube video about an hour and a half on call signs, the history, and as you know, the very beginning of call signs was a command. But X was a special case. So there's more, I don't know the details, but.
So there's a reason that we can't use X there. Maybe we should assign that as homework for everybody to go look that up, figure that out, and report back to me so I don't have to go look it up. Okay, so call sign usage, moving on, we have E, when the operator license class held by the control operator exceeds that of the station licensee, an indicator consisting of the call sign assigned to the control operator's station must be included after the call sign. Boy, that is a mouthful there. What do you think that means? Chris is rereading it just to make sure he's trying to understand it.
Technician, and we've got an extra coordinator guy that's in charge. You probably need to use his call sign if you're broadcasting.
So if I'm at field day and I'm a technician class licensee and I walk up to the get on the air booth there and there's a dude there who's a amateur extra and he's got his HF radio there and he says, "You want to get on the air?" And I say, "Absolutely, I do." Then I need to make sure I'm using the station licensee's license privileges and call sign, not mine as the control operator, right?
Use yours and then use theirs.
This is exactly the opposite.
It's the opposite of that, right?
Yes, it's the operator has higher privileges than the station owner.
Yeah. So figure that one out. I think we need to think about that a little bit. Okay, the next one says,
I mean, it's just a piece of equipment. How do they-
is the hardware licensed or is the control operator licensed, right?
Right. It's confusing.
Yes,
I
is
know
the
it's
answer,
confusing.
right? Yes.
Both is on your license.
Yeah. So,
You know, that, a lot of that has become obsolete, the KTHE stuff, because of the fact they don't print licenses anymore.
Right.
It's in the database and it's not there till it
So you don't have to have a physical copy of the license hanging on the wall outside your station or inside your station anymore, because they don't issue a paper license anymore, right? So I don't know if they need to reevaluate this paragraph, but it is kind of confusing the way that it is. So also, when the control operator is a person who's exercising the rights and privileges authorized by section 97.9B of this part, an indicator must be included after the call sign as follows. For a control operator who has requested a license modification from novice class to technical class, KT, for a control operator who has requested a license modification from novice or technician to general class, AG, and for a control operator who has requested a license modification from novice, technician, general, or advanced class to amateur extra, they have to use AE. So this is a case where I have my license, I'm a technician class, my license is KD7ZWV, I've passed the test for general. So now I can actually get on the air as a general class operator, as long as I put KD7ZWV stroke AG, acting general, right? Or interim, sometimes what people say.
That's if you're on the general bands.
Yes. Yes. I still can only
You don't
use
have
it.
to identify if you're doing 2 meters.
Right. I don't have to use that if I'm on a technician class, using technician class privileges. I don't have to use the stroke AG. I guess I could use it if I wanted to, right? But, yeah. I'm very proud of my, I know nowadays, before they had to mail you your certificate, right? So until you actually got the license in the mail, you weren't official. So you could do this back then, but nowadays it's like the VECs will send your indicator of passing the test to the FCC electronically. Your license will be updated probably within 2 or 3 days at the most.
It takes most new hams that long to program a golf thing anyway.
Right. So, you know,
I can tell you that when I was 87 DJL, when I passed my general, I already had my
Your station,
rig there,
yeah.
And I would always use 87 DJL /AG, because I was now able to get on there.
until you got your
And
new
it was
call
a
sign.
couple weeks before I got the
Yeah.
license.
Yeah. Okay, and the last one is G, when the station is transmitting under the authority of section 97.107 of this part, an indicator consisting of the appropriate letter numeral designating the station location must be included before the call sign that was issued to the station by the country granting the license. For an amateur service license granted by the government of Canada, however, the indicator must be included after the call sign.
Unless it's on Thursday.
After 12.
After 12.
On Tuesday when it's dark, right? Yeah. At least once during each intercommunication, the identification announcement must include the geographical location as nearly as possible by city and state, commonwealth, or possession. This is the reciprocal operating authority rule. And it's the one that says, let's say I'm a British ham and I've got my British ham license, and the US has a reciprocal operating authority agreement with Britain. So when I come to the US, I can use my British call sign, but I have to follow this rule. Now, if I'm from Botswana and I'm a licensed amateur in Botswana and I come to the US, Botswana does not have a reciprocal licensing agreement with the US. So I have to contact the FCC in the US and request a US call sign to use while I'm in the US if I want to do that. And quite often they will grant that just fine and give you, you could do that before you travel, for example. Same thing if you're a US citizen and you're traveling to somewhere like, I don't know, who don't we have agreements with? North Korea. Yeah, nobody has an agreement with North Korea. So I don't think North Koreans are allowed to use amateur radio by default. So, but South Korea, maybe. Yeah, right. There, you don't get the $10,000 fine in North Korea. You get the firing squad, right? So,
That's right.
Yeah. So that's something to consider is if you're traveling or planning to travel, maybe you're going to the Bahamas. You need to check the rules and find out, do we have a reciprocal operating agreement with Bahamas? Is it okay for me to take my radio with me and go there and use it? Do I need to contact the FCC equivalent there and find out if they need to issue me a temporary operator's license so that I can use my radio there? Plus, you'll probably want to know what rules there are anyway, as far as what bands you're allowed to use, what frequencies you're allowed to, what modes you're allowed to use and all of that, right? So that's all super important. Okay. That's the call sign basics, Dan.
And how about if you're in international waters? I have to check this because.
That, I think you have to get permission from the captain of the vessel that you're on. Same thing applies on an aircraft. You have to have permission of the pilot in command on the aircraft to use your radio.
Call sign and maritime, mobile, and the region. So you have to know the region you're sailing into.
So,
Arctic or the Antarctic.
We're still trying to figure out the time zone.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know about Arctic because nobody really owns that. Antarctic, there are probably treaties that specify what part of Antarctica you're in and who's responsible for that. I don't know. You'd have to look into that. But yeah, I'm sure there are rules about that specifically for that reason. That presentation that we watched, was it last week, the Hamsai guy? And he was talking about operating from McMurdo Station at the South Pole. And he was using a call sign that was a US type call sign from there. Now McMurdo Station is a US station. Maybe that's part of the reasoning. I don't know.
Is he military?
No, he was a civilian scientist. So. All right. So that is your basic rundown on the official FCC call signs. Now we get to the meat of the presentation, which is the tactical call signs. So what are tactical call signs? How do we use them? That kind of stuff. So tactical call signs identify a location, an assignment, or a purpose. They are not issued by the FCC. The tactical call sign doesn't change based on who's operating. It identifies the logical station regardless of the operator, the actual operator who's on duty at that station. So examples of tactical call signs, net control. We have a different net control every week, but they're always net control. That's their tactical call sign, right? The Murray EOC might be a tactical call sign. IMC, Intermountain, where the heck is it? Over there. That might be a logical call sign or a tactical call sign. Grant Elementary, Station 81. In the case of non-emergency events like race start line or race finish line, on the bike MS, we used call signs based on your location, like Newton, Cornish. Ragnar was always at lunch for some reason. I don't know why, but
This is like a fat joke. He was so fat.
no, he just always seemed to end up at that station for some reason. I don't know why. Ragnar, do you know why you always get assigned to lunch?
I seem to be a good test sample, like good at test sample.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so that's the basic idea of tactical call sign. So examples of tactical call sign in use. Dan, I'm going to call upon you to read the net control parts of this script. Can you see it with or without your binoculars? Okay.
Grand Elementary, this is net control.
Net control, Grand Elementary, go ahead.
Can you provide a count of number of displaced individuals?
We'll get that info and call you back. KD7ZWB.
Understood, instead of XDL.
And then some period of time passes while Grand Elementary goes and figures out how many they've got. And then they come back and say, net control, this is Grand Elementary.
Grand Elementary, net control, go ahead.
We have 13 displaced families with a total of 45 people.
Confirm, I copy 13 families, 45 people,
Confirmed, KD7ZWB.
and 7 XDL.
Okay, so we're gonna break this down and talk about it. So this is just a sample communication that might happen. So what do we observe from this exchange? On the initial call and responding calls, only the tactical call sign is used, right? When a particular exchange is complete, i.e. when Grand Elementary tells net control, hey, I got to go get the info. I don't have it right in front of me. I'll be away from the radio for a minute while I get this, or I'm going to stop talking. So if something else happens on the radio, you guys go ahead and do it. I'll get back to you when I have the info. Then each station gives their FCC call sign to satisfy the end of communications requirement. Remember, we have to identify every 10 minutes or at the end of the communication, right? Net control has to allow stations to ID when they are done. And this sometimes doesn't happen. So you'll hear something like Grand Elementary stand by. And then net control is like, are you going to ID? How long am I going to wait? And so he might want to come back with Grand Elementary, are you done? In which case Grand Elementary should say, oh yes, KD7ZWB, right? The tactical call sign refers to a function like net control or a location like Grant Elementary. And if you're taking more than 10 minutes for your conversation on an emergency event like this, you're probably talking too much and you should probably stop, right? We've all heard the rag chewers get on the 6.2 and they're just like, and like, I swear I've heard people talk for 20 minutes without unkeying. I know that can't happen because the repeater will time out after 3, but it feels like that sometimes, right? And then you're thinking, why aren't you IDing? Why aren't you IDing? Why aren't you IDing? And they just never do. Or let someone else talk, right? So in an event communications like this, if you're talking for more than 10 minutes and you need to ID because of the 10-minute rule, you're probably talking too long, right? All right, so tactical call signs, gotchas, and errors. Tactical call signs should be consistent. So it's great to have Grant Elementary, but you don't want to have Grant Elementary and that other school over by the river. That doesn't really help you, right? You need to make sure that if you're going to use a call sign based on the elementary school that somebody's at, you're consistent. Grant Elementary, what is it, Parkside, was Macmillan, right? But basically the ones that are, you want to be consistent. Every location or function should have its own tactical call sign. Don't use your FTC call signs with the tactical call sign. Only use it as needed to satisfy the requirements. So every 10 minutes and the end of the communication. So you'll notice in our example conversation, we didn't throw our call sign out until we were done. We didn't say at the end, Grand Elementary KD7ZWB, clear. We just said the call sign because hopefully they already knew, net control already knew who they were talking to, right? And don't forget the sign at the end of your communication. Net control might need to allow or remind a station ID to ID. Aid station 3, this is net control. Do you have additional traffic? I didn't hear you ID. I hear sometimes on our Sunday net, people will ID when they call, and then someone will make a comment and they'll come back with an answer, but they won't ID. And that's the last I hear of them. I'm not naming any names. I've been known to do it myself, but that's not following the rules. You need to ID on your last transmission. And I know I've even called out and said, I'll leave a space for you to ID now. And still don't hear any ID come back, right? So.
I've heard nets where, for events, where there came a time when net control said everybody ID and everybody ID. And you couldn't understand any of them, but that's not what the law requires.
That's not what the law requires. It just says, get out there and say it, right? Yeah.
So if you were coming in on channel 3 television, they'll hear your call sign and that's all that matters. Everybody needs to hear it.
Okay. So other uses of tactical call signs. APRS. Who knows what APRS is?
Automatic position reporting system.
Automatic position reporting system.
Packet reporting system.
No, it's packet is correct. It's not position.
Oh, you're right.
And Bob Bruninga would always say, it's not about the position. The position is part of it. You can send your position, but that's not what it's for. APRS is a tactical mechanism for disseminating information to everybody who might be interested in it, right? And that information can include things like where stuff is, but it can also include things like, hey, there's a meeting tonight at 6:30 at this location or whatever, right? So it's not about position. Bob Berninga is a silent key now. He passed away last month, unfortunately. But he was a pretty cool guy.
I'm still picking up his APRS position.
That actually wouldn't surprise me. His radio's probably still turned on, right? Yeah. Until his daughter goes in and turns everything off and throws a match in the computer room or the radio room and shuts the door. I don't know. So mobile units for APRS, non-mobile units like Restop 2 or something like that, you should place those as APRS objects because they don't move, right? So with APRS, there's a concept of stations and there's a concept of objects. And any station can publish an object and say, I'm going to put this object at this particular point. And so if it's a fixed station or a fixed place or something like that, a fixed unit, it should be used as an object. And you can clear those objects when you're done. So you should always make sure you do that. Mobile units should set their my call to their tactical call sign. But what's wrong with doing that? Your my call is how you're IDing FCC wise, right? So you also need to put your FCC call sign in as the beacon or status text that gets sent with every packet. Now, why don't you put your tactical call sign as the beacon text and use your real call sign as your my call? Because some APRS software that is trying to display this information will not show that beacon text unless you ask it to specifically. It will only show the call part of the station ID of the packet. So that can be an issue, and there's some ways to work around that depending on what software you're using. Some software actually has a mapping mechanism built into it. Exaster, for example, or Zaster, or however you pronounce it, has a table that you can configure dynamically by sending a tactical message on APRS that says, my call sign is this tactical call. And Zaster will happily show you on the map the tactical call information, which is totally cool. Unfortunately, not all software does that. And not all software believes in this tactical special message either. What's the APRS IS 32 or something, ISCE 32, something like that. That one allows you to specify a mapping between a call sign and a tactical call or tactical name, but it doesn't understand the tactical message type that sets it. So that's something that you'd have to set up manually. Another problem with it is tactical call signs should be descriptive of the usage, but tactical call signs or call signs in APRS are limited to, 6 characters, a dash, and then a 15-bit, 16, it's a 4-bit number. So it's a 0 through 15 station ID number, SSID number. So that kind of limits you on what you can make your tactical call say. And so a lot of people think, well, do I need my tactical call sign to be specific to my event? Like, say I'm participating, I'm SAG1 for Bike MS. Do I need to put Bike MS SAG1 as my tactical call sign in APRS? Well, you got to keep in mind, APRS is for tactical information, not global information. It's a global system, and that information does get put out on the global APRS network, but it's really geared for your local event or your local operating location position. So you should use something simple like SAG-1 if you're SAG-1, right? Or SAG-2 as your tactical call sign, right? On APRS. Let's see. Don't forget to remove your objects. Don't forget to reset your my call settings after the event. I was poking around on APRS.5 the other night at like 12 o'clock, midnight, and I did a search for SAG-3, and I found one. And it was on some dude's truck that's sitting in his driveway at his house in whatever town he was in Illinois or wherever. And it's like, well, obviously he forgot to change it back to his call sign. He left it set at SAG-3 when he went to bed that night. And so there's a SAG-3 out there that's still happily beaconing away. I don't know if it's still doing it now. He may have fixed it by now, but yeah, so that's one thing that you need to be aware of when you've done this for a tactical call sign for an event. Don't forget to reset it when you're done. Same thing with your objects that you've placed. Make sure you remove them when you're done. And then the last part there is about the automated mapping that some software will let you do. How about in WinLink? So WinLink calls these tactical addresses, not tactical call signs. Because if you remember, WinLink is about sending messages like emails, right? So it calls these tactical addresses. Tactical addresses are associated with one or more call signs. So when you create one, you can assign specific call signs to it and deassign them on the fly. They can be created on the fly via the WinLink Express software. They do have to be globally unique because WinLink is a global system. So that's something to consider. The call sign can be up to 12 characters total in length. So a little bit longer than the APRS call signs. It has to be a minimum of 3, a maximum of 12. And it can have 1 dash character. Only alpha characters are allowed to the left of the dash, both alpha and numeric characters are allowed to the right of the dash. It says it has to be uppercase. I think the software takes care of that. If you happen to enter it in lowercase, I think it interprets that correctly. I don't think it enforces that. And you don't have to set a password when you create one of these, but if you do set a password, then you can control like the whitelist for internet email being sent to that address and have it actually come out across the air to you, not just on the internet. And then of course you can delete them when they're no longer needed. One of the gotchas that happens with this sometimes is people will create the tactical call sign, they'll set the password, they'll do their thing, and they'll have forgotten the password by the time they finish their event. And so there's that tactical address out there, and they have to get in touch with the WinLink maintainers and say, can you guys delete this for me? I forgot the password. And they'll delete it for you. They don't judge. They may judge, but they don't say they're judging. So tactical addresses have to be globally unique. And the ARRL recommends a standard for creating a tactical address. They recommend the first 2 or 3 characters identify the state or province, the remaining characters specifying the section official or a further breakdown by county and province. Site name or local official would be the next part. SSIDs can be used after the dash for further specification as needed. For example, UT SLC EC would be the Utah Salt Lake County Emergency Coordinator. UT SLC MRY-EOC would be Utah Salt Lake County Murray Emergency Operations Center. And again, that as a tactical address, you would assign multiple ham addresses, multiple physical call signs to that. And so multiple people could pick that message up. NTS addressing can also be used. NTS, we talked about that before. That's the National Traffic System, right? And so those would start with NTS or NTSD and be followed by other designators as required by whatever you're doing with it. Okay, so that's all I got. Questions, comments? Tomatoes, fruit. I'll accept any fruit that people want to throw.
So for the Greater Salt Lake Shakeout or whatever it is, what are our tactical call signs?
I would say they would be based on your location, wherever you happen to be at, right? So if you are at the Murray Rec Center, your call sign might be Murray Rec Center, right? If you're at an elementary school, your call sign might be the name of the elementary school. If you're at the EOC, your call sign might be Murray EOC, right?
So we're gonna wait for instructions from somebody to give us assignments.
That's the idea, right? Those are things that are typically assigned by the coordinator, the event coordinator, whoever that may be.
We will get frequencies and everything.
That's the idea.
So if you're on WinLink or EPRS, one of those global systems, and you're at John F. Kennedy, it's gonna return a lot of pings.
It could. All right. Anybody else? Comments, questions?
Thank you. Is it, I'm trying to think actual emergencies that could occur. Is it likely that in some kinds of emergencies, the person arriving at a place that's going to be a shelter might have to pick that
Yes.
call sign because the coordinator had no idea there was going to be something there?
There might not be a net yet, right? So when you first come on frequency, if you're the first person on frequency, you're the net control until somebody official gets there to take over, right? So, yeah, you might be, say you show up over at IMC's emergency room and you walk in there and say, I'm an amateur radio operator. I'm here to facilitate your communications. I'll be sitting right outside this door. If you need anything, let me know. You get on the radio and you say, this is KD7ZWV. I'm at IMC emergency room. Is there anybody else on frequency? If net control is there, they'll say, yes, and your tactical call sign is IMC emergency room. If there isn't, then you're net control, buddy, until the EOC comes online, right?
Until we find Dave.
See you, Carrie. All right, other comments? I am going to stop the recording.